Hello and welcome to another episode of WaveTalkers Live. I'm Chris Mattia. My call sign is Whiskey 6 Alpha Hotel. Today I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues Dan NR6V and David KK6DA. David Goldenberg is out on assignment today, so he might join in a little bit later. These guys will keep an eye out for him if he does join, so I can co-host him, and they'll just let me know about that. But today on WaveTalkers Live, we're talking about battery sizing. How do you determine the correct size battery or an appropriately sized battery for your amateur radio station, your emergency communication station, and so forth? So that's what we are going to be exploring as a topic. We will be doing a little demo today with spreadsheets. So if you have a favorite spreadsheet program, we all have our favorite spreadsheet program. It could be Excel, it could be Google Sheets, it could be any of the free ones that are out there. Have a free copy of that up and running, ready to go, because we're going to do a little demo of that in a little while. But before we get started any further, let me do the whole unpin, and we'll do today's question. So let's see, I'll remove spotlight and do the whole add a spotlight, replace spotlight, and there we go. Okay, let's go. Let's look at today's check-in question. So if you have access to Winlink, please go ahead and send us a Winlink check-in using a standard Winlink check-in form. Send it to all four of us. Our call signs are KK6DA, W0DHG, NR6V, W6AH, and our tactical call sign, which is WaveTalkers. In the comment section of the check-in form, just go ahead and let us know what type and size battery and or batteries that you have for your station. What do you run your emergency communications, your ham radio station? What type of battery do you use? Do you use a battery? Let us know in the comments section. And with that, let's do a quick hop over, and we'll do a quick little demo as to how to send in that check-in. So if you have Winlink up and running, you're just going to come over here to the upper left. You'll click on the new message button. Your new message window will appear. You're going to come up here and select template. You should get this little template manager window should open up. In the standard templates version, you're going to click on the little plus next to that. It springs this whole list of all these different forms open. You want to come down. Today we'll go into the mapping GIS forms. Go ahead and click into there. It's right down the bottom, Winlink check-in.txt. Just go ahead and give that a double click, and if the demo gods are with you, your web browser of choice should open up for you automatically. You're just going to fill this out, and the Winlink development team has done some nice things, like if you click in the date and time, it's going to automatically fill in the current date and time directly from your system for you. So we'll go ahead and do that. This is an exercise. And you tell us what band you're connecting from, what mode. This is where you're going to put in all of our call signs, not California, but you would actually separate all of our call signs using a semicolon and put our tactical in there as well. If you're inside of the Zoom, we went ahead and added that to the chat for you. So you can just cut and paste your call sign of the initial or on-site operators. Go ahead and plug that in right there. You're going to put in your station name. That's just your regular name. And your station call sign. You're going to come down here for the location, fill in your location as to where you're at. I'm going to put in my home QTH. You can put in the latitude and longitude. That will allow your check-in to be mapped at the end of the show. So we'll see where everybody is coming in from. Down here at the bottom, this is that comment section. This is where we want you to answer that question. What type of battery and size of battery do you have for your station? Do you have a battery? If not, let us know that as well. You're going to then go ahead and hit the submit button. It will ask you, there's a new prompt that'll come up, and it'll ask you if you want to name this a different thing. You just take the default name. That's fine. Then when you close the window, it should populate all that information here into that new message for you pretty neatly. Go ahead and post that to the outbox, and then you're going to open the session and submit that in. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick check and see if we've gotten any messages that have come in already. And yes, it looks like we have check-ins coming from all over the place. So that is very exciting to see those flowing in here. So we'll check back later in the show and map all of these check-ins to see where everyone is coming in from. But for now, let's dive in a little bit further into today's topic. So the topic for today is, what size battery do I need to run my ham radio station, for my emergency communication station? And this question is really going to depend. I should also note at the beginning, Bioenno is a supporter of our channel, and so many of the batteries that we have that are in the presentation have all come from Bioenno, but everything we're going to show applies across the board to absolutely every manufacturer out there. So with that out of the way, what size battery do I need? And the answer to that really is mostly determined is, what is your goal? That is a huge key to determining what size battery you have, because each different goal, how you're going to operate, what you're planning on doing, what your specific needs are for your mission is going to change the answer of what battery you need. So let's say you're just setting up to do POTA activation. You're going to go down to your local park. You're going to set up your QRP radio and just use a Surface or a tablet for doing some logging. You may only need a little tiny small battery in order to operate your station for a couple of hours or even a few hours, in order to, maybe your only goal is to be able to get your 5-watt radio up to 10 watts. So you're going to need maybe a small little battery for that. What if you're going to hike out into the backcountry and you're taking all of your gear with you? You're going to take it man portable. You're going to carry all of that on your back. You're going to hike into the backcountry for a day or a couple of days. You need a way to be able to charge your battery. You maybe need just a small battery that fits in the pack. That's something you're able to carry. If you're doing emergency communications and there's a major disaster, like say in Los Angeles, and there's a big major earthquake, the chances of you being able to drive your equipment all the way to the location you're deploying at are pretty slim. So you really may want to consider the size of your battery based on what you're able to carry with you on your back, or maybe in a small wagon or something like that. How about if you're just out operating, you're maybe a new ham, you're doing some portable operation, you're just, you're getting used to using HF. You may have very different needs as far as how much battery power you need. You need one, obviously, to be able to run the rig, but you're not in a mission critical situation at that point. But maybe you're operating for field day and you're racking up those contacts and you're constantly transmitting and listening, constantly calling out and making contacts. That's going to change what type and size of battery you need. How about if you are doing an emergency communications deployment, such as here, where we have our solar-powered gateway set up? This is set up as a share station right here. We're running an EmComm 7300 as the radio. We're running a Pactor modem. We've got the server that's running here. This is a mission critical situation, so the equipment cannot go down. So you may need to consider having batteries sized to not only maintain that equipment, but have two of them. You've got a primary and a backup in order to maintain all of that equipment and keep all of the different components in order to get that changeover to happen instantaneously. What if you're talking about an even more critical situation? Let's say you're the net control operator for, say, a medical radio network that's supporting a major race, and all of the communications that are being bridged for all the different stages are running through your equipment that's being set up here. That is going to be very different types of requirements. In a situation like this, you may be running off of generators and you only need enough power to provide a backup and the changeover in the case when you need to refuel the generators, or if there's a failure while you need to change over from a primary to a backup generator. All of those are different types of scenarios that are going to impact your decisions on the type of batteries that you're choosing to purchase and how you're going to configure those. So it really does depend on your specific mission. What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish with your particular setup? And that's going to dictate to you a lot of the choices that you're going to make. And we're going to walk through some of this logic today for some of these. So as an example, back in 2018 at the Baker to Vegas race, I was supporting one of the networks there, the Medical Radio Network, and our mission at each of the stages that we were supporting was pretty specific. Our mission was quite simply to get to immediately establish communications via this medical radio kit, or MRK, to the Medical Radio Network. We had to get these stations on the air right away, no delays. And then we had our second goal was to sustain operations for at least 15 hours. So that was the parameters that we had to be able to work within. Every different role, every different type of operation that you're doing is going to have a slightly different goal and different set of parameters for what you're going to do. So let's walk through this scenario, though, a little bit further. So first of all, what is one of these MRK radios? Well, it looks something like this. It's a commercial radio. It has an integrated mag mount antenna. There's an external speaker that's down here that's integrated with it. And to power the radio, there's a 12-volt auxiliary plug. So kind of like a cigarette lighter adapter that you may have in your vehicle. And the thought process here was for these radios, they would be deployed at each of the different stations along the race. And the medic would plug this 12-volt socket connector into the 12-volt connector, the 12-volt plug in their vehicle. And then we would use the vehicle power. It's already got a battery. You can restart the engine. You can charge up the engine and keep it running. And that was the overall plan for using this particular setup. We also had other batteries you can see in the background and some other things in order to deploy if we needed them. So what are your options for emergency power when you are out in the field if you need to get that station on the air? You can, of course, use that vehicle that has a functional 12-volt aux port. Notice the word functional. At one of the stations, in this particular station that I'm speaking about today, the vehicle did not have a working aux port. So we had to come up with an alternative option for us. We could have used another vehicle. We could have perhaps set up an AC generator and then pulled a 12-volt connection off of that in order to power the radio. We could have also deployed some batteries, and that's ended up what we did is, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in this today. So let's start off by talking about typical EmComm 12-volt battery operations. And I'm going to divide the world of batteries arbitrarily into two categories. I'm going to say there are traditional batteries and there are modern batteries. There's a lot of leeway to be able to go into details about these, but this is the world, how we're going to divide up the world for right now. So in the traditional batteries, we're talking about lead acid or flooded batteries. These are going to be like the battery that's inside of your car, your vehicle, your truck. We're also looking at absorbed glass or AGM batteries and gel cell. Now, these last two categories here, AGM and gel cell, these are considered deep cycle batteries, and your car battery is considered a starter battery. The big difference between the two is how deeply you can discharge those batteries without impacting the overall life of the battery. So your car battery is designed to deliver a lot of cranking amps, a lot of power very quickly to start the vehicle. And then once the vehicle started, the vehicle is going to be charging up your car battery. That is not really a very good choice to use for an amateur radio station, because on an amateur station, you're pulling lots of power out of the battery over a longer period of time. Gel cell and AGM batteries are what are considered deep cycle batteries, and it has to do with the chemistry as to how they're built. But in a nutshell, they can be discharged to much lower voltages and not have as great an impact on the overall life of the battery. You pay for that nice convenience, though. Okay, on the modern battery side, and again, we're simplifying this now. We're going to look at two types of batteries: lithium-ion batteries and lithium iron phosphates. By far, the lithium iron phosphates is primarily what we're going to be talking about here. So let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages first of your traditional batteries. On the advantage side, very high capacity. You can get very large capacity, and capacity is usually noted on batteries in terms of amp hours, and we're going to talk about that further in this talk. But you can have a very high amount of power that's stored inside of these batteries. They are relatively inexpensive. On the just price per pound, they are relatively cheap. They are readily available. You can pick these things up pretty much anywhere. For your regular traditional 12-volt batteries, pretty much any big box store has them, any auto parts store has them. Marine supply places such as West Marine and so forth also have the deep cycle batteries. And there are deep cycle battery options available to you in these, and we kind of mentioned that a little bit. On the disadvantage side, these things are heavy. I mean, they're really, really heavy. In fact, if you're deploying and you're using these traditional style batteries, more than likely your deployment kit includes either your vehicle and or a hand truck and or a forklift in order to move all of the weight of these batteries to transport at that short distance over to wherever it is that you're going to set up and operate. The other disadvantage of these batteries is the discharge curve, and we're going to come back to this topic in just a few minutes. But that is, in my opinion, these two disadvantages by far outweigh any advantages that the traditional batteries have. So let's look at the modern 12-volt batteries. And here, again, we're looking at two different types. Lithium ion, this is pretty much what every HT has attached to the back of it. It's a lithium ion battery. We're not talking about HTs today. We're talking about your mobile station and your base station operation. And so for that, we're mostly going to be talking about lithium iron phosphate batteries. This is the specific battery chemistry. It's much more stable than your traditional lithium ion batteries. And it's also referred to as both an LFP. You may hear me say that from time to time, and also LiFePO4. That's the chemical symbol for lithium, LiFe, iron, and O4, which is 4 oxygen atoms attached to it. So that's just a description of the actual molecule. All right, so in the modern LiPo batteries or lithium iron phosphate batteries, on the advantage side, extremely high energy density. These things carry an enormous amount of power inside of them for their physical size, which makes them really good because they're ultra portable in that respect. With that comes lightweight. These things really weigh next to nothing, and we'll see that in a chart in just a little while. So for being able to transport them, it's fantastic to be able to do. They're much lighter to be able to operate with. They have a high number of charge cycles. Now, this is not something oftentimes we think about because, we drive our vehicles and we drive them when we're starting and stopping our vehicles a ton of time. We're not oftentimes fully discharging the battery and then recharging them. When you deeply discharge a battery and then recharge it, it's considered a full charge cycle that's there. And many of the traditional style batteries do not have a very high number of charge cycles where the battery can be discharged and recharged and still maintain a good life. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, however, pretty much on across the board, those are about 2,000 charge cycles that will maintain. So you end up getting a longer life out of these batteries than you may expect. They also have a nearly flat discharge curve. There's that discharge curve thing again. We're going to come back to that, but remember that a nearly flat discharge curve on the and there's one more: connectors suitable for EmComm. So most all of the batteries by the major manufacturers have power pole connectors already on the battery so that you can directly connect your radio. And power poles are a super easy way in order to connect all of your battery equipment. If you have not done converted everything over to power poles, strongly suggest it. We'll do a show on power poles specifically coming up. On the disadvantage side, they're expensive initially, but the overall total cost of ownership may not be as much of a disadvantage as you may think. But there is a higher outlay of cash initially for the lithium iron phosphate batteries, and for sure. Okay, let's talk about typical battery discharge curves. And they say lead acid and lithium, think traditional and modern for both of these. So all your lead acid batteries, all of your deep cell batteries have what's considered a discharge curve that is pretty much linear. So what do I mean by that? So here's the voltage on the y-axis. And as you start drawing power out of the battery, the voltage is going to slowly drop off. It's going to diminish. And so if you're used to, if you lived on a boat, or you have a boat, or you've got an RV, you'll notice that a lot of times you'll check your batteries and you'll look at the voltage that's there. And you can see that that voltage is slowly dropping over time. You get in your car, you turn on the ignition key, you'll see a little gauge that'll show you what's the voltage of your current battery. And that drops off over time as more power is used, and it's pretty much linear. With lithium iron phosphate batteries, or most of the modern batteries, this discharge curve is relatively flat, which means as you're drawing power out of the battery, you're really not seeing a lot of voltage drop. I mean, you see a little tiny bit until it gets almost completely depleted, and then it drops off precipitously. It really just falls right off a cliff, and the voltage goes all the way down. At that point, you're, game's over at that point. Why does this matter for ham radio? Well, it matters because there's some magical voltage that most all of our radios require in order to operate. And once we fall below this magical line, wherever it happens to be, I've got this drawn on here roughly at about 12 volts. Once the voltage of the battery drops below that line, game's over. Your radio is no longer working. There are devices that you can plug in that can then artificially boost up the voltage in order to keep operating, draw more power out. We're not talking about those right now. It is possible to do, but now you're risking deeply discharging your battery even further, causing additional problems down the line. But I just want to make sure that that's kind of known that those do exist. But in general, once that voltage drops, you're done operating. Your radio literally turns off. And if you're using a lead acid battery or the traditional batteries, you're really looking at the total capacity being somewhere in the 40 to maybe 60% range of the total capacity of that battery being usable power that you can operate with. Once you fall below that line, doesn't matter that there's still another 50 amp hours in the battery. You can't really get to them very easily. However, with the flat discharge curve of the lithium iron phosphate batteries, you're getting nearly 90% of the rating for that battery out of the battery as useful energy that you can do something with, that you can keep running your radio with, you can keep operating your radio with. And that's really critical. So what is this cutoff voltage that is so magical, and how do you determine what that is? Well, the easiest way to do is you just check your user manual, and pretty much every user manual for every single radio and every bit of equipment, you'll find somewhere in there, you'll see this supply voltage, DC 13.8 volts, plus or minus 15%. But I said 12 volts. Well, it's kind of a rough guess. So how do we determine what that actual voltage is, and does it really matter? Well, let's do a quick little demo here. So this is where we break out the spreadsheets for the first time. And we're going to come over here. And so I have a very basic spreadsheet. This is just in Google Sheets. You can use Excel if you'd like to follow along. You can use pretty much any spreadsheet program. The data is going to work the same. The formulas are going to work the same. So what a spreadsheet does is it's got all of your data organized in a series of columns and rows. The columns are named starting with letters. So this is column A, this is column B, this is column C, and so forth. And this is row 1, row 2, row 3, and so forth. So basically what I've done here is I've just gone into this first cell and I've typed in voltage requirement V, which is in volts. So it's always a good idea when you're setting up your spreadsheet to make sure you put the units, because that's going to make a big difference in the long term as to what all of your numbers mean. So for voltage requirements, if we looked at that in our manual, it said 13.8. So I'm just going to select that cell 2. That's cell A2, and I'm going to say 13.8 volts. So I don't have to put the units here because I've said everything in this column is going to have these units. So I'm just going to type in 13.8. Next over here is the voltage range. And so this is that plus or minus. And in that sheet, it said plus or minus 15%. So let's tell our spreadsheet that everything that appears in column B is a percentage. It'll make it easier to track. Then we don't have to do any kind of weird math or anything. So just select B here at the top, and it's going to select the entire column. And then up here at the top, you'll find somewhere where you're able to define the format. And in this case, I'm going to change it to a percent. So I'm just going to click on the little percent sign. And now any number that I type in this column in any of these cells is going to be a percentage. So if I just click in cell B2 and I type in 15, as soon as I hit enter, it changes it to 15%. Now, I didn't do 15.00%. That's Excel trying, or that's the spreadsheet trying to help me out. It's trying to guess what my significant figures are. It's actually nowhere near that. So I'm going to just shorten up my significant figures here. We got to go, I got to do it for the whole column. There we go. And we're just going to move that decimal place over. So 15%. So when you're calculating the percentage, we want the calculated high value, and then we're going to calculate the low value over here. So we're going to click in this first cell. We're going to hit equals, just hit the equal sign. And now we're going to do 13.8, and we want to multiply that by 15%. But we want more than 15%. We want all of a full amount of that plus another 15%. So what we're going to do is we're going to write in the formula. So we're going to say it's written in A2 because we selected on A2 here. And now we're going to do times, and that's just the star. And then we're going to say a parentheses because we're going to add in a couple of parameters here. We're going to type in a 1 because we want 100% plus sign 50 plus this cell. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this cell, and it's calculated that cell there. I'm going to close the parentheses, and now I'm going to hit enter, and it's calculated that out for us as 15.87. That's the high value, the high voltage that your radio, once it goes above that, your radio is not going to be happy. It doesn't want voltage above that. So you want to make sure that your power source, the voltage is below that. So what about over here? So we could, of course, take and we could type in that same formula again, but we could modify the formula a little bit. We can say, instead of taking, and because you can select a cell and you can grab the lower right corner and you can drag it over. And when you drag a cell over, let me do it in this direction here. I'm going to grab this 13.8 and I'm going to grab the lower corner. I'm going to drag it down, and look what happens. It copies the contents of that cell straight down for me. I can grab this next cell here and I can do the same thing. I can grab that and I can drag it down, and it copies the contents of that cell. With formulas, if you grab that lower right-hand corner and you click and you drag down, look what happens. It is repeating the information, but if we look at the formula up here, we can see on the first formula, it's A2 to B2, and in the second one, it's adjusted. It's saying A3 to B3. So it's automatically adjusting the formula relative to the position that is in there. So, well, could we just copy it and drag it this way? We'll just grab it and drag it over and see what happens. That's a weird number. That's not exactly what we want. And if we look up in the formula, we can see that it moved the formula, everything over to the side. So that's not quite what we want. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to delete that. I'm going to come back here and I'm going to add a static reference to this. So instead of moving, I want it to stay in the correct row. Remember, we said the rows here are 2, 3, 4. I want it to lock on both column A and column B. So I'm just going to double click on the cell. It's going to bring up the formula, so it's a little bit easier to see. And now I'm going to come up and I'm going to edit this formula. I'm going to move my mouse right in here. And in front of the A, I'm going to put a $sign. And I'm going to come down a little bit further, and I'm going to put a $sign in front of the B. What that means is $sign means lock to this column. All right, great. So I'm going to hit enter return. I still have my 15.87, so that still worked. Nothing's wrong there. Click and drag down. Those all still worked. And if I click in this next one, we can see it did change. A3, change that one. A4, perfect. So now when we select, I'm going to grab this corner here. I'm going to drag it over to the right. And now we get, we're getting the same value. Okay, that's good. We've just copied it down. Now we're going to edit this formula. So now we've got 1 plus, but what we need is, we need 1 minus. So that's 100% minus 15%. Enter, 11.73. So if we had other values in here, grab the corner, we'll drop it down. Let's say you had other gear. Instead of 13.8, let's say your gear said it needed 7 volts. We'll just type in 7. And look at that. The spreadsheet will just automatically calculate that amount for you. What if instead of 15%, your gear was 20%? Well, there's the values that are there. So you can very quickly build up a simple model using a spreadsheet, using some very simple calculations in order to start probing and asking some questions. All right, that's the hard part of the math that we're going to do. Let's go back over now that we have a better range. So what we were really calculating here was 15.87 and 11.73. Oops, not that one. We want to stay here. I just want to go back to this. So there we go. There's our calculated equipment voltage. And for lead acid, it really does, it moves the voltage down just a little bit, but that really is showing us that where this line crosses, it means we're only going to get about 50% of the power out before our battery is not really useful for still running our ham radio. And likewise up here, we're actually at about 95% with a lithium iron phosphate battery. So if you're in the market for choosing a battery to go with your ham radio, look at a lithium iron phosphate battery. There's lots of manufacturers out there, but these are way better for all of the reasons that we just looked at. Okay, so how long will that battery run? That's the other part of this. First, you have to know which type of battery to get, and then you got to know kind of other parameters about it. And this is a combination of 3 things. The first is the total load in amps. And we'll talk about that here in just a second, how to be able to figure that out. Next is the battery capacity, and this is usually measured in amp hours. We'll talk about what amp hours are. And the third component of this is the duty cycle. And the duty cycle is a ratio of how much you're transmitting to how much you are receiving. And that basic, those 3 basic parameters are the 3 keys that you need to know in order to properly size your battery. So let's look at those in a little more detail. So how do you determine the load of your particular station? Well, the load of your station is the total sum of all of the devices that you have that are consuming power, that are running off of that battery. It's the total of all of the amps all added together to get what your total load is that you're drawing. And that's how much current you're actually pulling out of the battery over time. So you need to be able to add all that up. So a great way to do that is to literally use a spreadsheet. You can go in and you can mark, you can list all of the different pieces of equipment that you have. You can go in and you can figure out how many amps are being drawn out by each of those different pieces of equipment, and you can add them all up together. It's a really simple way to be able to do it. We just looked at how to do that with a spreadsheet. How do you figure those things out? Well, you open your manual is one way. And so this is my Kenwood D710G. It's a little page out of the manual. What you're looking for is you're looking for the transmit and the receive current requirements. And these are going to really vary quite a bit. So on this particular radio, it has 3 different settings. It's got a high, medium, and low setting for transmit, and it transmits in both VHF and UHF. And those have different current draws that are listed for those different bands and power levels. So for VHF, for instance, on high power, I'm going to be drawing 13 amps of power out of my battery at that particular time. Remember that number, 13 amps coming out of the battery at on transmit at high power. Now, one way you can make your battery last longer is to drop the power down. We should be doing that anyway. You should only be using, if you're doing amateur radio, the least amount of power that you need to get the message through. So if you're doing mid power, which is actually 10 watts on this radio, it's drawing 4 amps at VHF. And on UHF, it's drawing 6.5 amps. So it's not quite a linear relationship as to how much power is being pulled out of the battery when you're transmitting. For low power, 4 amps on VHF, 5 amps on UHF. But when you're calculating the needs, you need to determine how are you planning on using the battery. So if you're doing EmComm work, once you're out in the field, more than likely you're going to crank that sucker up to full power because you got to get that message through. If you're on shares or using commercial power or commercial frequencies, then you may be cranking up much above what you would do for a normal amateur station in order to make sure that you can get that message through. The other side of this coin here is the current drain on receive. And it's something to really pay attention to. So when your radio is just sitting there, it's receiving, it's still drawing current, it's still drawing power in order to do those things. And different radios draw their power at different levels. So on this particular radio, it's drawing 1.2 amps just on the receive sequence. The other way to calculate this is to get a power meter. So this is the one that I use. It's by PowerWorks. It's not sponsored or anything like that. It works really simple. It's got 2 sides to it. It's got a source side and it has a load side. You take the source side and you plug it into the source of your power. In this case, a battery, and you literally just plug the thing in and now it automatically boots up. And on the screen, it'll cycle through a bunch of different settings here. And in the upper left, it'll tell you how many amps are currently being drawn. The other side of this, you plug your load. You plug all of the downstream devices that you have running. And this will tell you how much power is being drawn out of the battery in order to power all of those different devices. If you get one of these, it's a really good idea to take each piece of equipment that you have and do this with it. Power it up, let it run for a little while off of your battery, and figure out how much actual current that particular device is using. If you go off the calculations in your manual, they'll oftentimes be a little more conservative. The manufacturers will oftentimes tell you that that they'll either create a higher level of what is needed, or they're going to give you an average. So it's a really good idea to know really what your particular radio is drawing, what your signal link is drawing power wise, what your laptop, if you're running it off of off your power source, is drawing. If you're running a Pactor modem and you've got that plugged into a power source, how much current is that drawing? You need to know what all of those are. The other thing that this device does is it also tells you over time how many amp hours have been pulled through from the entire system. And this is a really helpful tool here, because what you want to do is you want to set up your station, plug in the battery, and you can do this off of your regular AC power supply, just put this meter in line in between your power supply and all of your equipment, and it will still work and do all of the calculations if you're trying to size your battery and you haven't bought one yet. You can use this and just operate for a few hours at the normal way that you would be operating, and it will tell you how many amp hours your system is drawing. You can do some basic guesswork from there to do some calculations. When you go to buy a battery, all battery manufacturers will include some sort of data sheet with them. This happens to be a summary table. You can find it on Bioenno's website. I'll put a link down in the description, and we'll link it up later for everybody here in the show. But there's a couple of things. This lists out all of the batteries that Bioenno supports. You're looking at the batteries that's appropriate for your station. So if we're talking amateur radio, all of our equipment runs on 12 volts. So you don't need to worry about the 48 volt or more stations or other batteries. Just look at the 12 volt batteries. They'll also tell you the capacity of those batteries, and these are going to be listed in terms of amp hours. We're going to talk about that in just a second, and you can see what those all list out here. So for instance, this is a 3 amp hour battery. It's one of the little small ones, and this one right here is the 12 amp hour battery, and this one right here is the 30 amp hour battery. So you can get a size of those. Another thing that these batteries tell you is, or these charts tell you, is the max discharge of the battery. And it's going to tell you that in amps. And this matters a lot. Remember that number that I asked you to remember just a few minutes ago? What was the high transmit amperage for my Kenwood D710? It was 13 amps. So on high power, my radio draws 13 amps at high power. That's the high rating. So if I'm looking at, say, a 9 amp hour battery, they've got a couple of models here, and I look over in this range, I can see that the max discharge by the battery, how much that particular battery can supply out at any one time, for several of these 9 amp hour batteries is 12 amps, which means it's not going to work with my radio. It would limit me to getting the 18 amp or the one that will deliver 18 amps to me. So this particular model is the one that I would need to use. That's if I'm looking at, say, the 9 amp hour. More than likely, if I'm running if you're running a radio that requires that kind of current draw, you're looking at the higher capacity, or you need to know, hey, when I'm using this battery, I can only transmit on medium power or low power or something like that. They're all just parameters that you need to know. The third thing to look at on your battery specifications is the physical properties of the battery. So you'll usually find the length, width, and height. So is it going to fit in your go box, your backpack, your whatever compartment in your vehicle? Is it going to fit on the corner of your desk? And then it'll also tell you the weight of that battery. When we're talking about the traditional batteries, generally traditional batteries are about 3 times the weight of a lithium iron phosphate battery. So if we look here at the 12 amp hour batteries, they're roughly about 1.6 pounds. So a 12 amp hour lead acid battery is generally going to be about 1.6 kilograms, 3.6 pounds. It's generally going to be about 3 times that. So you're going to be able to carry that in your backpack with all the rest of your other gear if you're having to deploy. So those are some of the parameters to be able to keep an eye out. So what the heck is an amp hour anyway? So an amp hour is quite simply the amount, it's a measure of the amount of current that is drawn out over the course of an hour of time. So as a simple example, if you have a 30 amp hour battery and your radio, your load, your entire system draws 1 amp out, how much time could you operate that radio for? Well, 30 divided by 1, you could use a spreadsheet if you want, but this one's easy math. 30 divided by 1 is 30 hours. You could roughly operate that particular radio for about 30 hours with a 30 amp hour battery. Let's do another example. Let's say we still have that same 30 amp hour battery, but now our radio system is drawing 2 amps on average. How long can we run that? Well, 30 divided by 2, we can operate that station on that battery for about 15 hours. Let's do another example. 30 amp hour battery still. Now our station is drawing 10 amps on average. For how long can we run that for? Only about 3 hours. Suddenly you start to see the problem here. The more power you're drawing, the more power hungry your equipment is, the faster it's going to draw that power out of your battery. That amp hours is kind of like the fuel tank in your vehicle. It's how much fuel that you have. And so the faster you're going, the more power you're pulling out at a faster rate, the shorter time you're going to be able to operate for. So that brings up the question of, okay, what the heck is duty cycle? So duty cycle is simply a ratio of time for transmitting versus time for receiving. Now, what does that look like? So let's take the example of you're the ham who's just setting up out in the field and you're doing a little sideband. Maybe you're a new ham. This is a new ham who's getting on the air for the first time, making their first HF contact. By the way, it was a really fun time. That duty cycle might only be considered 10%. 10% of the time, you're transmitting, you're keying the mic, you're drawing more power out of the battery, and 90% of the time, you're listening. What happens if you're a medic at an aid station? Well, for much of the day, hopefully, your duty cycle may be only a 10% duty cycle, but let's say an emergency happens and suddenly you're having to communicate back to dispatch, and you may have an 80% duty cycle. You're communicating, you're transmitting a lot more information. You're constantly keying that mic. You're doing a lot more talking than you are listening. So your total duty cycle would have to take that into account. What happens if you suddenly find yourself as the net control operator for an exercise or for an emergency? Yes, this is really what happened, and that's the face that I made when I found out and I showed up for an exercise that I was suddenly net control because the person who was supposed to be net control showed up and they didn't have a voice. So what does that duty cycle look like? Well, more than likely, that's about a 50% duty cycle, because every bit of traffic that comes in, you are oftentimes repeating back out. You're constantly listening and talking. You're exchanging information all the time. You really are keying that mic a lot. And so you're drawing that power out of your system at a much faster rate. And these are just a couple of really quick examples. So let's look at a simplified duty cycle calculator. So with that, I'm going to drop out of here. I'm going to go back over to my spreadsheet. And this time, we're not actually going to build this out. I'm going to walk through the example that I've already created here, and I'll share the spreadsheet out afterwards so folks can get it, and I'll click in the cells so you can see what they are. So I just have this simplified duty cycle calculator. I've got listed out here the battery in amp hours. So this is the known battery size that you already have. And the radio station receive amp. So this is the on calculated. So if you're doing the measurement, this would be the overall measurement of all of your devices for your station, how many amps they are drawing when your station is just sitting there at receive. You still want everything plugged in order to measure this, but you could do a quick calculation to figure what that is. And then I'll scroll up just a little bit so you can see it. The radio station transmit amps. So again, you would then, a great way to do this is to use a dummy load and simply have that connected to your station, key up your mic and transmit, and you can watch on the meter what your transmit amps are, and you would write that down. We're just going to use the values that we got from that spreadsheet. So let's go with the spreadsheet. Let's go with the scenario of that 30 amp hour battery that I've got here. And my station on receive, the receive amps is 1.2. This is for my amateur station. And then for the radio station on transmit, let's say I've got 13 amps on transmit right there. So I'm only running my radio through here. You would obviously plug in the more accurate numbers for the station that you've got. So underneath of that, I've got, just like we did that calculation where we had some values plugged in and then we had formulas that were running off of those. If I scroll down just a little bit, I created this projected runtime timetable here. And let me zoom out just a little bit so it's a little bit easier to see a little bit more of this. I'll zoom out to about 100%. And so you can see the whole table that I've got here. So what I have is I created this duty cycle. So I said, okay, what's 100% duty cycle? Because it's an easy thing to kind of figure out. Projected listening hours. Well, if I'm transmitting 100% of the time, there's no amount of listening that's happening. I'm just blabbing, and that's not really a good thing anyway. If I click into that cell, I'll double click on it. You can see the formula, and I'll post these up so that it's a little bit easier to see in a few minutes. All I'm doing is I'm doing a basic calculation here to figure out what that value would be. Next would be the projected hours of transmitting. So with this setup, it's actually calculating I could transmit for 2.3 hours. So at 100% duty cycle, the bottom here is the sum, the adding up of both of these two figures, 2.3 hours. So I've got this so that it calculates at 75, 50, 25, 10, 5, and 1% duty cycles. And then it tells you roughly how long you could operate. So with this station, if I'm only doing a 10% duty cycle, so I'm that, that ham who's just, mostly listening. Maybe I'm the operator out in the field. I'm deployed. I'm mostly going to be listening, and every now and then I'm going to transmit. With this setup, I could use my radio for about 22 hours or so, 22 and a half hours or so. If I'm doing 25% duty cycle, now I'm at 19.3. 50% duty cycle, I can operate for 13.7. So I sized my battery for how I was planning to operate my setup. And so for my particular amateur radio, that D710G, this is roughly what I could expect to be able to operate my radio for. But that MRK is a very different type of radio. It's a commercial radio. It uses more power. It draws more power. In fact, I've got it written down here so I would remember. The MRK on receive draws 4 amps of power, and on transmit, it's drawing 20 amps of power. So let's plug those numbers up here into this formula. So on receive, I've got 4 amps, and down here for the transmit, I've got 20 amps. And now, look at this. My calculations are very different now. So if I'm only doing 10% duty cycle, that radio is only going to be able to be operated for about roughly about 7 hours. And remember, our goal for this particular mission was to operate for 15 hours. We had to have that operating for 15 hours. There's no scenario here using that particular radio, using these particular settings, where I would have been able to operate that radio for this amount of time. You're going to need to come up with alternative ways to be able to deal with that. I've also started here in this spreadsheet to give you a sense. I've created a quick little spreadsheet where I list out some of the different equipment that I'm operating with. And I've gone in and looked up in the manuals, what are the receive amps? What are the transmit amps? What is the max current? Knowing what that max current is really important when you're going to get another radio. And for instance, this EmComm 705 on receive, it's only drawing 0.5 amps. That's it. So I can operate that 705 for way longer on receive than I can operate my D710G. So it's a great radio for just being able to listen, even if I'm not transmitting on it, because it's got a much lower current draw on it. Transmit, it's maxing out at 3 amps, whereas some of these other radios, here's the FT991A, that at max power at 100 watts of power, it's drawing 23 amps of power on transmit. So you've got to start taking these things into consideration when you're trying to size your battery for your particular station. And all of this information is all available on each of the different manufacturers' websites in your manual. It all came with each of your rigs. So it's a good idea to start to track these and figure out what works. Now, these values here are for maximum transmit power. So if you're going to be operating at, say, 50% power, well, do a quick calculation, figure out what that is, use your power meter and determine how much current your particular radio is drawing for that. And then you can plug it in and you can see, hey, is this going to work for me or not? I've also just duplicated that voltage requirement, and it's pretty interesting. Most amateur radio equipment is all at 13.8 volts, plus or minus 15%. Some radios, though, the Elecraft KX3, for instance, I don't even have that in here because it is using only its max voltage that it requires is 7 volts in some scenarios and 13 volts in another scenario. So you can start getting out, you have to build your model for your particular equipment to figure out what your overall needs are going to be. And by the way, in case you needed to add up, like let's say this is, instead of these are all different pieces of equipment, let's say this is all my entire station. Let's say I needed to add up all of that information. You can click into a cell, you can type in equals, and then type in sum, parentheses, click and drag from the top down here, close the parentheses, and it will automatically calculate for you the sum of all of those. So you don't even have to really think really hard. Just build your spreadsheet, list out the information, and then do a sum at the bottom. And you can very quickly notice now, because I just did that, I can grab that lower right-hand corner and I can drag it over. And so now I know if this was my actual station, I would be drawing 7.78 amps on receive and 84.14 amps on transmit. Obviously, I'm not going to run all of those stations all at one time off of one battery. So, but you get the idea as to what we're talking about there. Okay, so that's the simplified calculator. How are we doing on time? Look at that. I'm actually doing pretty good on time. All right, let me come back here, back to play. So how long would this station run? Well, according to the duty cycle calculator, about 7 hours at 10% duty cycle. So if that was the situation that we were in and we're still trying to accomplish the mission, we may want to look at some options of reduce power on transmit if possible. That may not be possible in an emergency communication situation. In this case, it wasn't possible. I couldn't turn the power down because we couldn't get to dispatch without having the high power on this particular setup. You could have backup batteries, primary and backup. So you can have a second battery you can swap in when that's ready to go. Or you can augment the battery power by adding something like solar power or other types of generators to continually add more power into the battery. But that's another show that we will do coming up, where we can start to look at how do you figure that out for your solar power. So when we started this off, we said, what size battery do I need? And well, really the answer depends on your particular mission, your goals, your equipment that you have in order to figure out what's the right size battery for your particular needs and how you're going to accomplish that particular mission. So with that, let me switch back over to my station here. We are getting close to the top of the hour. I'm going to do another quick check to see if we've gotten any more check-ins that have come in. And yes, it does look like we have gotten a few more check-ins that have come in. I'll download those. I did see a question, and I apologize, I wasn't able to keep up with all of the questions going in the chat, but I did see a question come in: is will this file be available on WaveTalkers? Yeah, I'll put a link to the spreadsheet, and I'll put it up as both an Excel spreadsheet so you can download it and you can just kind of play with it, as well as a link to a Google Sheet to it. And okay, so we'll do one more check here in case anybody else just sent in. Sometimes it will not have those. All right, there we go. Let's check the map and see where we got our check-ins from today. I'll click the little map icon. This is going to bring up and select from, because all of these came in to me. Then I will see all of these. I'm going to select the Winlink check-in form. My map provider that I'm using is Google, but there's lots in here. If you want a different map, you can choose those from there. Some people have asked, by the way, if I get deployed out in the field and I don't have access to the internet, will this still work? And the answer is yes. As long as you've already gone on and you've looked at the map, it'll actually cache the map for you, cache the map that you've been looking at inside of your system. So like, let's say you're deploying for a regional event in your area. And as long as you've already gone in and you've mapped out the area, you've looked at it inside of Winlink will cache that map so you can still access it. Kind of fun. I'm going to click the display map option here. The demo gods are with us. There we go. We've got that. Let me go ahead and blow that out to full screen. Let's check our filters to make sure we're displaying only reports for the last 10 hours. That's pretty good. We'll say save, and let's see what we got. We've got, let me zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to hold the right click and drag. And there we go. We've got Terry coming in from New Zealand. Thanks for checking in down there, Terry. ZL1HOG. We've got Franz coming in from Austria. Oscar Echo 3. Frank Quebec Uniform. We've got Roland coming in from Germany. Thanks for joining us from Germany. We've got our friend from Canada, Victor Echo 3, Yankee X-Ray. Let's go ahead and zoom in a little tighter on North America here and get a closer look at some of the check-ins that we have coming in. I'm gonna actually start down here and look at some of those coming in from Los Angeles. WB6NCT, thanks for joining us. Who else do we have over here? N6HEG, we've got KD6LLB coming in from Vegas area, N7GET, WB6TOU, KF6NPG, KE6FIQ, KG6CFC. Up here in Oregon, W7OVN. We've got KC7KIT and KC7KIT up there. There you go. John, you're there. Hey, good to see you again. KC5LAA. Down here, we've got KN2Z. There's King, KC7LOX. We've got stations coming in Colorado. I'm just going to click through a few more of these. We'll see where everybody's coming in at there. Really appreciate everybody who's joining us today and sending in our check-in. So there we go. We've got everybody showing up on the map. Love that. With that, let me bring the guys back up. Let me zoom myself back into the studio. We'll bring the guys back up and add spotlight. These guys did not expect to be here today, which is why it was kind of a solo show for the most part. But hey, Dan, any closing thoughts for you?
Well, I think your charts really show the advantages of a LiPo battery when you consider that the same numbers on a lead acid type battery would be in the range of 50% of the operating time. So even though the LiPo batteries are much more expensive, if you could get a LiPo battery with 40% of the capacity of a comparable lead acid, now the prices are going to be a lot closer together. And not to mention the size and lightweight and the number of charge cycles. So yeah, they're steep to buy. They're getting better all the time. But in the big picture, they're much cheaper. And the LiPos are much safer and just really all around a better battery.
Now, one thing to keep in mind, Dan was saying LiPo, there. And LiPo batteries are actually a whole different technology. So you really want to think lithium iron phosphate, or LFP. LiPo, those are the ones that do explode, and they're little tiny bags. If you pierce the bag, they can rapidly discharge, and they definitely do start fires a lot. The lithium iron phosphate, having that iron inserted into them makes them a heck of a lot safer of a battery. Lithium is still a very active metal to begin with, but having that iron bound in there is a really good chemistry that's there. So just something to keep in mind. David, KK60A.
Size matters, my friend. Excellent explanation. Just a personal example. I was on an exercise 6 months ago or so. Well, it was a year ago. And I had a 35 amp hour AGM battery that was running my MacBook Pro. And MacBook Pro, the generation that I have, 2019 i9 chip, is really power consumptive.
Try this at home.
It uses a lot of power. So it used up 65% of the battery in a 5-hour experiment exercise. So what did David do? He goes out and buys 100 amp hour traditional AGM battery. The nice UPS guy delivered it, and guess how much it weighed?
A lot.
62 pounds. You're not going to take that very far.
You're not backpacking that sucker.
Yeah, no. And since that time, I've acquired a Bioenno 100 amp, and it's 22 pounds. And not that I'm going to put that in my backpack, but you can certainly lift it and put it in your trunk a heck of a lot easier.
When in an upcoming show, we'll talk about augmenting your power. And so one of the solutions that I've gone to is when I'm operating portable, I'm oftentimes carrying this little teeny tiny 3 amp hour battery. What size is that one?
This one is 6 amp hours.
6 amp hours. So twice the size. This weighs like basically nothing. And then I have a solar panel that I carry with me. So the two of these combined, I can operate pretty much with my 705 until the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
But you do need to take into account when you're planning to do that type of operation, and we'll get into this more when we do the longer show on it. If you're planning on augmenting with solar power, if you're going to operate around the clock, you need enough power to get you through the night so you can operate all night long. And then you need enough power still left in reserve to keep operating the next day when the sun comes up, because the batteries are not going to instantaneously charge. It's going to ramp up. It's got to put some of that power back in, and you're still pulling power out of it. So we'll talk about sizing your solar array and sizing your overall battery when you take those things into account in a future.
I use this battery, and I have a smaller one like you did too, a 3 amp hour. This will run my Microsoft Surface Go-To computer, I swear, for 10 days, probably more than that. It just sips power.
Yeah.
As opposed to the MacBook Pro, which I love, and I am a big Apple supporter, but it's so power consumptive. I'm not going to take that away from the house.
Yeah, when you start looking at the newer, more modern the M1 processors, it's a completely different ball game at that point as well, because the my 16-inch MacBook Pro absolutely sips battery power. I can operate that thing for about 10 hours editing video on the built-in charge. So it's a very different kind of setup.
Chris, you might want to leave this question to the after party, but you piqued Tanya's interest when you said my home station is battery power. I reminded her in the chat that you are a sailor, so you run your boat that way. Nice picture of that this week, by the way. And so you want to take a second or two and tell us how it's set up?
Absolutely. So I mentioned early on in the very beginning that we've been working with Bioenno for quite a while, and they've sent us some batteries to be able to help teach with. And so when they sent those to me, that 30 amp hour battery, that was several years ago. I have operated exclusively off of battery power since. I no longer use the AC to DC inverter here in the house as my main power supply. I always operate off of battery power, and for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's RF quiet. It's a lot quieter. I don't have to deal with any of the other electrical noise of having my power supply inject any noise into my circuits. I did notice quite a difference there. The other reason is I now know exactly how long I can operate with each different piece of equipment all the time off of my battery. I know how often I need to charge them. I always know the charge state of the batteries that I'm operating with. And so that makes it so that I'm pretty much ready at any point to be able to go out and operate. I'm much more familiar with operating off of those batteries. So, yeah, I've been every now and then I'll plug in, or if I'm running my amp, an amplifier, and I'm running it 500 or 600 or 1,000 watts, then yes, I'm running off of mains. I'm not operating with that off of battery power. But for the most part, my 7300, my Kenwood D710G, and the QRP radios that I have, all of those I operate exclusively off of battery power. When it comes to the boat, that's a whole different ball game. I have a house bank of batteries with several hundred amp hours of power, and I have a starter battery, which is even more power that's available to me. And yes, I've actually wired power poles onto that so I can plug my radio directly into the ship's battery and to be able to operate. Because you know what? 12 volts is easy. Once you adapt to 12 volts and you lock that in your brain, and I really strongly encourage you to think in terms of amp hours. It makes things so much easier. And I know I always get questions about, well, what about watt hours, watts and watt hours? The problem with watt hours is quite simply confusion. We're already using watts to determine how many watts are you transmitting at? Well, I'm transmitting at 100 watts. Well, how many watt hours is that? Well, it's not actually the same watt hours because it has to do with the current draw that's going on inside of there. So just switch over to think of your current draw as amps and amp hours, and you can simply add them up, the number of amps for each different device that you have. Just make a simple spreadsheet, add those up, and then know that you can run all those devices for 1 hour is in 1 amp hour at that. So there we go with that. If you found any of this information, a lot of people have asked, like, where is this stuff going to be? It will all be on WaveTalkers. It's all going to be on our YouTube channel as well. If you're looking for a way to be able to support us, a great way to support us is to actually go onto our YouTube channel, like and subscribe to us there. That really helps them show our content to more people, helps build us up. If you really want to help us out, you can certainly come to the WaveTalkers website. You can go on, we have a little buy me a coffee link, and you can send us some support to help us keep all of this infrastructure up and running. So with that, I think we've kind of filled up our hour here of blabbing about this. If you're inside of the Zoom, we do encourage you to hang around. We're going to open up for the after party here, and we'll take some questions and go into a few more things. But with that, I will say 7-3 to everyone. Thanks for joining us. If you are joining us online, and I will go ahead and end up the live streams now at this point.